President Trump is the first president in a very long time to ask what is the relevant market. When countries like Korea, Australia, most of Europe, countries that we have, and Brazil for that matter, we considered allies, in fact, use their vast market power as sovereign nations to, in fact, adversely affect our competitiveness. It doesn't matter, and I'll go on the record, it doesn't matter if you have a 100% market share in the United States. If, in fact, foreign nations, in jealousy or simply not wanting to, in fact, allow these unicorns to exist, in fact, use their market power to stop you. That is what's going on, often with our closest allies. And thank you for holding this important hearing, notwithstanding the professor's claim that this is somehow politicizing. Nothing could be further from the truth. The fact is, this subcommittee and the entire committee has clearly been on this subject for a long time, but it vacillates. As the ranking member would often state, forget about competition abroad. I'm talking about the subcommittee ranking member in this case. Let's just go ahead and focus on American companies. Nothing could be more inappropriate. President Trump is the first president in a very long time to ask what is the relevant market. 3 out of our 4 witnesses understand the relevant market in antitrust is now the world, and in tech it is the world. And when countries like Korea, Australia, most of Europe, countries that we have, and Brazil for that matter, we considered allies, in fact, use their vast market power, not always in that product, but their vast market power as sovereign nations to, in fact, adversely affect our competitiveness. It doesn't matter, and I'll go on the record, it doesn't matter if you have a 100% market share in the United States and a 100% global market share as an original innovator. If, in fact, foreign nations, in jealousy or simply not wanting to, in fact, allow these unicorns to exist, in fact, use their market power to stop you. That is what's going on, often with our closest allies. Notwithstanding, I'll just quote one, and I'd like it put up behind me. Chairman Zhou of the Korea Free Trade Commission. That's a wonderful title. In his own words, disparages America, takes us down, and in fact, his commission, as this board says, and I'd ask unanimous consent that the entire article be placed in the record, says, so why are many Americans, especially white workers in the Rust Belt in the Midwest, so angry? I'll tell you why they're so angry. As somebody born and raised in Cleveland, Ohio, in somebody who happily went to work for the Trump administration because, in fact, they believed in free and fair trade, something that we had talked about but always left the second half off. The fact is, we now have to take on the status quo of global competitiveness. China, but also our allies. Europe, one of our closest partners, including Australia, in fact, are operating in unfair trade practices. The Digital Markets Act is just one in which every unicorn in that field is American, and as innovators, and they as regulators, they intend on using regulation to take us out of our competitive lead. Let there be no doubt, there are additional barriers, and they are not new. I know that the testimony we are receiving today is important, but I'm just going to give you one piece of testimony. More than 40 years ago, I began traveling the world and doing international business. More than 30 years ago, I was in South Korea for a trade conference. The highest level of management at that time, both government and at the Samsung and the other majors, proudly said to the delegation that had gone there, we're so delighted to have you here. We want you to, in fact, come here and invest, transfer your technologies, and enjoy the benefits of our ability to make your products. He didn't even listen to himself. They were not interested in buying our products. They were not interested in joint ventures. They were interested in technology transfers. Even when they manufacture in the United States, Hyundai and Kia, They won't even obey our rules, and in fact will illegally bring in their own workers, which has recently been found by this administration. So I normally ask a lot of questions. I'm not going to ask a lot of questions this time. I'm going to thank our witnesses. I'm going to, because you raised your hand, go to Professor Portuguese, because you do want to say something, and I'd like to hear it. Eat quickly.
Thank you very much. I want to revert back to the point that you made about relevant markets, because that's at the basis of antitrust principles. In order to look at if companies abuse their positions, we look at first you have to define the relevant market. We cannot call companies monopolists if we haven't defined relevant market. And you said that the relevant market today is the world. That is true. I just want to add that also the relevant market is not online or offline. These companies compete both with other online platforms, but they compete with also offline groceries and other things. So the idea of first insulating what we call digital market is wrong-headed. There's no such a thing as digital market. There are markets. And digital is just a means of distribution to the consumers. So when digital platforms compete, digital advertising competes with print advertising. Digital supermarkets compete with groceries offline. And so the competition is much larger than what we can think.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Mr. Chairman, I'd ask unanimous consent to enter into the record an article entitled "The Chinese Fan Who Made It into the Trump Administration." This article discusses the professor who is with us here today, Mr. Alford, and without objection.
Without objection.
Mr.
Now
Chair,
recognized.
I ask unanimous consent.
Go
Ask
ahead.
unanimous consent to submit Trump, Warner Brothers meddling pushes the limits.
Now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Raskin, again for 5
Mr.
minutes.
Chairman, thank you very much. Mr. Alford, you served in the first Trump administration and the second Trump administration. Is that right?
Yes, correct.
Am I correct in deducing you are a Republican?
Yes, correct.
Thank you for your testimony. I'm wondering about this. What's the greater threat today to a healthy and competitive U.S. economy? Corruption in our own antitrust agencies or foreign countries' enforcement of their antitrust laws?
I would say the former. The concern for protecting the U.S. market is absolutely critical to the American people. And what we want in the United States is vigorous antitrust enforcement that will protect the average American. And that is being undermined now in light of the undue influence of lobbyists.
The DOJ manual begins by stating the legal judgments of the Department of Justice must be impartial and insulated from political influence. Can you share with the Judiciary Committee what you saw as the second most senior political appointee at the Antitrust Division of DOJ relevant to that principle?
Yes, obviously I have to be careful with respect to government deliberative privilege, but as has been publicly reported, lobbyists are pervasively involved in every level of the Department of Justice, trying to influence the outcomes, not based on the merits, but based on relationships that these lobbyists have with particular individuals in power. My written testimony actually goes into detail of numerous different articles that sort of outline that kind of problem.
So in that context, if our antitrust system is failing because it's being overrun by insider influence, political lobbying, money contributions, and so on, what do you think the role of this deflection is towards international antitrust in the conversation about what needs to be happening in America?
Well, obviously, if you really want to focus on the politicalization of antitrust enforcement, we should focus about fixing our problems at home first and foremost. With respect to concerns about what is happening abroad and the extent to which there's discrimination, most of the cases that are being addressed with respect to European antitrust enforcement have very close parallels to exactly the same kinds of cases that are being brought in the United States by Republican administrations, as well as Republican state attorneys general, as well as private parties. You can go down the list and look at what the European cases are and then find parallels in the United States.
So you've taught both international antitrust and domestic antitrust for decades at Notre Dame Law School and other places. Can you explain, can you put in just a common parlance what it means to American citizens, American consumers, small businesses, if we depart from strong antitrust enforcement and instead let the whole system be overrun by insider influence and big money?
Well, just last month, the Rasmussen poll had a survey of whether or not American people support vigorous antitrust enforcement, and the results were overwhelming American support for vigorous antitrust enforcement. And so what we fear and what we think is happening is that rather than having cases decided on the merits, there are cases that are being resolved based on political relationships. And when that happens, there is a corrupting influence that happens throughout the government. And the risk is real that without the contributions of state attorneys general or private litigation or careful judicial oversight, that the good work that the Antitrust Division is trying to accomplish, that Gail Slater is trying to accomplish, will not be possible.
So, but again, if you would break it down for us, and I'm talking about like the original principles of antitrust, if we allow for greater and greater concentration, consolidation of corporate power and control over markets, what does that mean to consumers in terms of prices? What does it mean to workers in terms of wages? And what does it mean for the possibility of other businesses to enter into the competitive sphere?
Sure. So obviously, if there's not vigorous antitrust enforcement, then the pocketbook issues that are central to the American people with respect to housing, healthcare, agriculture, entertainment, the whole variety of different industries that are critical to the American people, all of those prices will go up. There will be lower quality and less innovation and fewer entrants.